Hello, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about a solemn subject, which is the situation in Israel and the Middle East at the moment, including the Gaza Strip. And I just want to give an objective view of what I believe is the situation on the ground. Obviously, I'm not an expert by any means in Middle East relations. In fact, this channel is normally devoted to chess subjects. So I've slightly gone off point. However, I think it's I'm trying to give an objective view of what a Westerner might consider to be the situation there. So I'm only going to try and state what I believe to be truths. Now, currently there seems to be an ongoing war situation there in Jerusalem, which is a shame. And in the Gaza Strip, I should state as well, because it's a very beautiful part of the world. I've never been there, but it's very clear that, the Mediterranean, Middle East, a very beautiful and historic part of the world. Now, the problem with Israel and the Gaza Strip, I believe, dates back to the late 1940s. After the Second World War, Britain was in control of that territory. So the UK, this country I'm living in at the moment, was in control of that territory, and they had a mandate for Palestine. There was already a Balfour Declaration at the end of the First World War, rather, in 1918, which declared that Jewish people would have a place in the Middle East at some point. And that was carried through by the British government because they gave territory to the Jewish state, and the Jewish state was created. It became Israel. Now, I believe what happened was the Arab states were not in favour of this mandate. They believed that Israel had taken over their lands, their territory, so they attacked Israel. And Israel then counterattacked, grabbing more territory. Now, bear in mind that Israel is not a very large place. We're only talking about 22,000 square kilometres. However, originally I believe the plan was to have half of Israel belong to the Arab population, or the Muslim population really, in reality, and the other half would belong to the Jewish population. However, the Israel then grabbed more territory than they were originally allocated. I believe that to be history, although some people might question that. It should also be stated that around about that point in the late 1940s, Palestine itself didn't exist as a country. I believe it was just I'm not sure if it wasn't actually a recognised state. Okay, like England at that point, United Kingdom would have been a recognised state by United Nations. So it's only more in recent years that I believe that Palestine is recognised by many countries. So, very awkward situation. Now, a lot of people claim that Jewish people have come into that land and taken that land and don't belong there. However, their history dates back many thousands of years, back to the times of the Old Testament. And funny enough, I was reading the Old Testament the other day, and I was reading Exodus very briefly. You just open up on the page, and he stated something about how the Israelites could claim the land from the desert to the sea, and drive out other sort of tribes like the Mennonites and the Canaanites. And also, I believe the Canaanites were also Jews as well. So it's slightly confusing. The whole religious thing is very confusing, very difficult to understand. But of course, there have been Jews and Muslims in that area for many, many years. So it's a very complex situation. The situation in the Gaza Strip is very perilous as we speak. There's been many attacks from the Gaza Strip into Israel. We heard about the parachute attacks. There's atrocious terrorist attacks. There was a terrorist attack on the festival, for example. People trying to celebrate peace, ironically. And they were attacked by people coming from the Gaza Strip. Terrible terrorist attacks, okay? However, it should also be stated that the Gaza Strip has been under occupation, I believe, since something like 1960s. So it's been under a military blockade for many, many years. So effectively, you've got a city that's bottled in there. And that gives extreme views a kind of a weapon to use, okay? So they can say, look, they're really treating this country very harsh, very strictly. I don't think you should bottle up a country. But of course, people living in Israel, they probably have a much better appreciation of what's going on. They might state that actually we're at risk if we free if we free the Gaza Strip and we let freedom of movement there. They will just attack us again in a much more serious way. So therefore we bottle them up. But I don't think you can realistically in the long term bottle up an entire country. I think that goes against what, in my opinion, the way that humanity should proceed. We should all be free. But yeah, it's a very awkward situation. Obviously, during the Second World War, the Jews were treated very harshly, well, in a terrible way, by the Nazi war machine. And they were effectively put in a state of genocide. I believe the Nazis originally had a plan to send some Jewish people out to Madagascar. However, they then decided that this was not workable once they started losing the war. So they decided that the best way to proceed was to create a kind of final solution, which meant that they subjected the Jews to horrendous gassing in their thousands and eventually millions, which is obviously which obviously took part in the concentration camps in places like Treblinka, and also, of course, very famously Auschwitz, which is in Poland. It was occupied by the Nazis at the time. So I believe that some of the Jewish state of Israel's belligerence and willingness to counterattack against its enemies states from sometimes from this kind of defensive reaction to the way they were treating the Second World War. And I think a lot of the sort of younger generation of Jews were kind of critical of how some of the people who were subjected to these crimes during the Second World War did not fight back. But they weren't in a position to fight back. They didn't have the weaponry. Generally, they weren't able to fight back. So, in my opinion, Israel has a right to defend itself. If they are attacked, they have a right, as right as any other country to defend themselves. What worries me is that this state will continue for many, many years. We have this very extreme elements of Islam, taking root in Gaza Strip, because when you are subjected to this kind of extreme state where you're not allowed to leave your own country, and also I do believe that a lot of Muslims, they hate the idea that the Jewish people have come and lived in their territory, rightly or wrongly. In my opinion, wrongly, but that is the state of affairs, and that is preyed upon by the more extreme versions of Islam. We've already seen that with people like, organisations like Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, ISIS, that they feed upon people's fears and insecurities, and they bring about an extreme state of affairs. They rely on an extreme interpretation of Islam. So therefore they believe that anyone who doesn't follow the Islamic faith to the letter, or their interpretation of Islamic faith, is therefore a kafir, an unworthy person, and therefore subject to any kind of, subject to death, effectively. So someone like me, who's a non-believer in the Muslim faith, would be subject to that, and even fellow Muslims who don't follow their rules can also be subject to that. So those kind of people would therefore obviously be very unhappy about any kind of Jewish state whatsoever. They wouldn't believe in a Jewish state, okay? They reject that. Their only idea is that the whole world should be a Muslim state. So these kind of people in these extreme circumstances have come into power. I believe that Hamas, a lot of their beliefs, as you know, revolve around this very extreme version of Islam. So they've come into power in the Palestine state. They won the elections. I don't know whether they won them fairly or unfairly, but they won the elections. And at the moment, they are effectively leading this kind of assault on Israel. This kind of long-term assault on Israel. They don't like Israel. They will subject Israel to terrorist attacks, rocket attacks, and Israel will counterattack in kind. And Israel are now looking to invade the Gaza Strip and destroy Hamas on a military level. But you cannot destroy an idea, right? If this ideology takes root, it doesn't matter if you wipe out all the Hamas commanders or the Hamas fighters, eventually more will take root. So my belief is that at the moment you cannot solve this problem, or you cannot solve it very easily. The only thing that can solve it is the future. You have to have a situation where people born now are not hating Jewish people, or the Jewish people born now are not hating or fearing Muslims. Until you get to that situation, there's no genetic imprint which says that a Muslim child now is going to hate a Jewish child or hate a Christian child. So you need to really, really kind of implement that situation. In my belief, it's about education. It's about the new generation. Sadly, we seem to have lost the current battle for wills and minds. But that doesn't mean we'll lose the battle in the future. So you need to have a more moderate form of, for example, Islam take root. We've seen that to some extent in countries like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia were negotiating with Israel, but at the moment that's kind of taken a back seat. Obviously these events have taken precedent. But if you had a more moderate version of Islam, obviously in Saudi Arabia they still have take-out executions, they still treat women very badly. I would say compared to what we do in the West. In the West we have far more freedoms. However, they don't necessarily subscribe to this extreme ideology either. So yeah, it's doing it step by step till you get to a point where people can come together. I don't like the idea that Palestine or the Gaza Strip will be wiped out altogether because the Israel are so frightened of them that they decide to wipe them off the map completely and take that territory. And I think that would backfire on them if they did. I don't think that would be a good idea. So these are some of my objective thoughts. As I say, most people would probably quite rightly say, what does it matter what you think? You have no idea or knowledge of this situation. But this is what I think. I don't think the Gaza Strip should be under military occupation permanently. I believe if you free it up, it might work out better for Israel in the long term. But of course, people living there might have a different view. But it's a very unfortunate situation. It's a very beautiful part of the world. The Gaza Strip is hugely overpopulated. It's an ugly place in the sense of lots of buildings clustered together. There's a huge number of people living in a very small area. And to some extent, Israel is like that as well. So, I think there's ways and means that we can improve it, but it's obviously a very complex and difficult situation. And the worry is that it would explode into a greater level of violence throughout the Middle East. And we could be looking at a third world war, which is the greatest fear that everybody has. But anyone living in that area is living in fear at the moment. So hopefully things will improve. We've already got the situation with the Russia-Ukraine war, which has impacted on the global economy and impacted on people living in Russia and the Ukraine. So, yeah, very, very unfortunate situation, but that's just my views. I understand this is not a politics channel, this is a chess channel. So a lot of people would not be interested in what I have to say, but that's just what I think. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe and follow my channel.